A lot of times you hear a politician say, you know, the truth is we have a lot more in common than we have that separates us. It's not true. The gap between left and right is gigantic.
Why hello my fellow apes, I hope you are well. A while back I created a series of responses to Dennis Prager's Masters program, and I've been meaning to continue it for quite some time. So far I've tackled the first and second episode of his series, but there are way more episodes to go through. But today, and as Dennis just said, we're going to be focusing on the differences between the left and the right. And what I found particularly fascinating by watching this through beforehand is that it tells you more about Dennis and the way that he looks at the right and left, and particularly the way that he sees the left. There is a lot to respond to, and hopefully this live format will lend itself well to doing so. As for anything that's a bit more hefty, I'll end up making a scripted video, just like I did with my prior series.
Welcome to the Masters program. I'm Dennis Prager. So, you're in for a ride.
That you most certainly are.
Every one of you knows how divided America is. But not a lot of people can explain the divisions.
So the first thing to be said is that while emphasising the polarisation of the United States, Dennis and the Daily Wire team have chosen very specific imagery. He shows imagery that depicts exclusively left-wing people as the disruptors. But if they wanted to be more fair, then what they should have done is shown equal images of people trying to ban abortion, to ban gay rights, trying to prevent trans people from receiving treatment. Not just children, adults as well. This use of imagery to complement what they're saying is something that's done very common by all sorts of people, to be frank, all sorts of parties, but it's particularly bad, at least I've noticed, with the Daily Wire, and it allows them to say more than what they're actually saying. So if I say one thing, and I don't quite say it in a certain fashion, but I show imagery that depicts and fills in the blanks of what I'm implying, then it gets the message across, and we're going to get to that message in just a second.
I feel them, but I want to explain them.
One of the most important differences between the left and the right.
I have a long time saying on my radio show, my motto is, I prefer clarity to agreement.
I've got an issue with the comments that you were making.
I'm not giving you a hard time. I'm curious to know your thinking. I'm not arguing with you. These are very fair questions you're asking.
It's not a political issue, Dennis.
What
it's
is
an
it,
issue.
then?
Very often if a caller calls up and differs with me, or even if I have a guest who differs with me, I always say I'm not interested in debating you. I'm interested in clarifying where we differ.
Now, what Dennis is achieving here is two things. The first is that by illustrating that he's not interested in a fight, what he's interested in is clarity. He's getting across this optics, this envisionment of him being the adult in the room. So people might come up to him and want to argue their positions and be belligerent and cantankerous, but he sat there going, no, listen, I just want clarity. I want truth, I want honesty, and I want to be able to pursue forward. Put another way, one of the things that the Daily Wire is trying to do lately, and indeed the right I've noticed in general, they're trying to portray the left as childish and themselves as the adults in the room. And this is part of that narrative building.
Now, that's not to say that I don't debate people. I certainly do. But generally speaking, I find that if you push for clarity more than you do to make someone agree with you, you get a lot further.
Now, despite what I just said, I really do appreciate the clarity angle. I think not enough people are looking for clarity. For instance, the reason I think the whole trans debate is such a shitstorm at the moment is because people are not interested in clearly understanding their opposition. Dennis is no different, by the way. He does this in this video, and we'll get to this in due course. Maybe not in this response, but hopefully in the next, or maybe the one after that. Depends on how much you guys enjoy this kind of response. Now, clarity really is sorely missing, and it's because echo chambers discourage it. They want us to say, no, our opposition are bad people, and that's it. We don't need to consider anything further. But here's the thing. What use is clarity if your opposition is refusing to listen to you? You could be as clear as you like, but if they're just going to hear what they want to hear, and then that's it, well, how can progress be put forward? You see, I find that Dennis and his ilk, what they do is they say they're for clarity, but they don't do the most important part of clarity, and that is actually listen to what their opposition is saying. And this is why they keep repeating the same straw man positions of what their opposition believes. It's very much a performative work. They are appealing to their audience and their audience's intuitions. They're not trying to genuinely convince left-leaning people to change their mind.
In that spirit, I'm offering these differences between left and right.
Once again, we're seeing that use of imagery, right? So whenever it shows the left, it's showing acts of violence and of turbulence. But whenever it shows the right, it's showing order and stability.
I have a few other preliminary comments. Not every single person on the left holds every single view I will say that is on the left, and not every single person on the right holds every view that I ascribe to the right. That's inevitable. So why am I doing this? To explain how conservatism and progressivism, if you will, left and right, differ. And then maybe you can then say, well, wait a minute. I thought I was X, but maybe I'm more like Y.
Now, we've already spoken about narrative, but this is where the narrative from Dennis is pretty much opaque. He's setting the stage to say, this is what the right thinks, which he's going to present in a very reasonable fashion, whereas this is what the left thinks, which he's going to present in a very unreasonable fashion. And what he's going to invite you to do, as someone watching, is to reevaluate where you sit. Do you sit with, the right, which is being reasonable, or do you sit with the left, which, well, is very childish? This is the narrative that's being played in this video, and it's a very common narrative at the moment. Seeing through these narratives has become increasingly difficult today, where hidden agendas often manipulate how a story is being framed, and algorithms control the kind of information we're regularly shown. This further divides an already polarised society, which is why I'm a big advocate for ground news. They offer a platform that combines thousands of articles from across the world, so that we can compare how a particular story is being covered across the political spectrum. In fact, they go out of their way to highlight biased reporting on their blind spots feed, showing stories that are being over or underreported by either side. Here's a story that caught my attention. 3 arrests after Just Stop Oil protesters spray orange paint on London's Wellington Arch. On their website, we can see 9 articles have been published on this, and more than 70% are from right-leaning outlets. And the left, in this case, isn't typically reporting this incident at all, likely because the mere act of reporting it works against their narrative. Couple this breakdown with other such insights Ground News has to offer, such as the factual reliability of their reporting. In this case, more than 70% are rated mixed factuality, and so it's clear to see that coverage is heavily subjective and highly sensationalised. Like the LBC, for example, which uses words like vandalise to describe the actions. I've been using this tool for over a year now. Not only does it help me gain clarity of stories by looking at all sides of it, it even helps me make sure that I'm not falling into an echo chamber myself by checking my news-biased dashboard. Ground News aligns so well with what I do here that I highly encourage you to check it out at ground.news/rationality. You can subscribe through my link for 30% off unlimited access before November 15. The link is in the description. Thanks.
Give you an example, something that I have often felt. Notice I haven't used the word liberal, because liberals and left are not the same. There are so many arenas where liberal and left don't agree. We now have in the United States of America all black dormitories on some college campuses. That is the opposite of what liberalism taught.
So I did a little bit of research into this, hoping that it wasn't true, but it looks like it more than less is. If any of you watching know more about this than I do, and you want to correct me, then do so below. But from what I could tell, this is true, and as a liberally minded person, bear in mind I don't live in the United States, this just strikes me as a very bad idea.
In fact, I have a video on the internet at PragerU.
What's the difference between a liberal and a leftist? This question stumps most people because they think liberal and left are essentially the same. But they're not. In fact, liberalism and leftism have almost nothing in common.
So I'm not talking about liberalism here. What liberals tend to do is they vote for the left, but their values are far more conservative than they are leftist. That's not my subject. I just wanted to make that clear that I'm not talking about liberals or liberalism, I'm talking about leftism when I speak about the left.
Again, we're looking at narrative control here, and what I want to say is that the same could be done to conservatives. We could say that there's a separation between libertarians and evangelicals, and yet, in the United States, what happens is the libertarians, who value freedoms, end up voting for evangelicals, which want to grab our social lives and very much put it in a box. They want to tell us what drugs we can and can't take. They want to tell us who we can sleep with, what our relationships are. They want to force religion down people's throats. You can point out this irony. And thus, ironically, libertarians vote for a party that constrict liberty.
The differences between left and right are spectacularly enormous and spectacularly plentiful. I don't expect you to remember all of them. But these are very real and substantial differences, and they are meant for clarity and to help you determine whom you might side with.
Here we are again being encouraged to listen to both sides and to see which of them better resonates with you as an individual. And we're just going to have to trust that Dennis is going to do his due diligence.
Maybe you will 80% of the time agree with the left, or 80% of the time agree with the right. And you didn't think of yourself as that prior to this. That will be a very valuable lesson for you.
Alrighty, so now, finally, we're on to the first big difference between the left and the right according to Prager. Normally I wouldn't want to spend this much time on an introduction, but I actually think it's really important, and the more that I produce content on apologetics, on politics even, the more I realise that this stuff is actually more important in many cases than the arguments. And the reason being is that we are a narrative-driven species. We follow stories. That's how we make sense of the world. This is why religions tend to do well. They're very good at encapsulating some of the heuristics that work in our minds and presenting them in a way that's palatable and sufficiently interpretable to different people in different contexts. And what we've just seen from Dennis is some mastercraft in this. Either the Daily Wire or him, probably a mixture of both of them, they know what they're doing. So we've got the narrative before us. Let's see how Dennis compares the left and the right.
What is the greatest value in society? The left and the right have a different view on that matter. For the left, it is equality, and for the right, it is liberty.
Perhaps not surprisingly, I already have a big disagreement here with Dennis. The left's view, in my opinion, is actually more akin to what Jordan Peterson has said, and that is that it's about equality of opportunity, not equality of result. Yes, you will definitely find people on the left that want equality of result. They tend to lean towards Marxism, but most of the left isn't that way inclined. They just want a better opportunity for people. Likewise, I would say that the right doesn't generally care about liberty. What it cares about is order. You just need to look at right-wing media to get a very good clue on what they think of liberty, and particularly how they want to rob the liberty of other people based on what they conceive as objective truths about the world. And this is where language becomes such a big problem, as well as worldviews, right? If you're convinced that your view is objectively true, then you don't need to make some claims towards equality or liberty, because you're just fighting for truth. And just before we move on, getting back to the whole liberal and libertarian perspectives, they're very, very similar. Both of them are trying to give freedom. It's just they disagree on what constitutes freedom and what allows for freedom. The liberal, at least by my lights, is going to say that freedom requires that people are not bound in the chains of poverty. They absolutely need those chains off in order to exercise liberty in the first place. And this is why the liberal tends to be in favour of taxation. They want to redistribute some of the wealth. They don't want complete equality. They just want some of the wealth to trickle down so that the society can flourish. But when it comes to people's private lives, both the libertarian and the liberal are going to say, look, it's none of my business. I don't want to establish any laws that are going to change this. So please, get on with your life. It's none of my business.
And you might say, well, why can't you have both? The French Revolution, after all, did say equality, fraternity, and liberty. Those were its mottos. The American Revolution had life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It didn't include equality. The American Revolution was, I think, in that way more intellectually honest. Because the truth is, Equality and liberty don't go hand in hand.
Dennis is of course correct to say that equality and liberty are in tension. That's absolutely true. However, what he misses, and what so many conservatives miss, at least by my lights, is that without sufficient equality, there is no liberty. What we need is a very complex and very difficult balance between equality and liberty. And because that is a very difficult thing to do, it doesn't lend itself very nicely to simple narratives. The one thing that I think everyone should be cautious of is one-dimensional views when it comes to things this complex.
The more free people are, the less equality of result you will end up with. Some people have more talent, some people work harder, some people have more luck.
And it's the luck element that left-leaning people are focusing on. Luck allows for opportunity, and opportunity grants liberty. I come from a very rough background, and a lot of my childhood friends are either in a very bad state now, or they're dead. But they didn't fail, as Dennis very heavily implies, because they didn't try hard enough, or because they weren't talented enough. No, they failed because they fell out of the wrong vagina. They started life 1,000 yards behind most other people. They didn't stand a chance. To illustrate this, suppose that Dennis's child shows from a young age an inclination towards the violin. Well, what can Dennis do? Dennis can go, right, we're in a comfortable position, we're socio-economically safe, so let's pay for some lessons, let's give you a nice violin, let's encourage and cultivate that amazing artistic quality that you have and see what you can do with it in life. And then that child might become very good at that and be able to make a living themselves. Whereas when I or one of my friends showed a particular skill that they had that very much could have been cultivated, our parents and our society couldn't act on it because they needed to pay for food. They couldn't pay for lessons. They couldn't give us a violin. They couldn't give us opportunities. If you want to understand the left and its emphasis on equality, it isn't so that everyone gets the same things. It's not everyone gets a violin. It's just everyone has a decent opportunity at life.
Everybody believes, both left and right, that the human being is equal in God's eyes if you believe in God, or equal at birth, or equal before the law, which is what really matters.
Now, I would slightly amend what Dennis has just said. Most people believe that we ought to be equal before the law. We ought to be equal with opportunities. We ought to be viewed as everyone being the same under God if you believe in God. The problem is that we haven't created a society that reflects this. It's up to us to do this. Even if you believe in God, you should recognize, surely, that it is up to us to fix this problem. If we are equal in God's eyes, does it not seem befitting to you that we should try and make it so that everyone gets a decent chance at life? And for what it's worth, I think that this is one of the most hypocritical positions off the right. They speak of liberty and they speak of everyone being equal, but they don't want to recognize, at least by my lights, that you need to make sure that people have equal opportunity.
That's true. But the equality that the left talks of is equality of result, or what they call equity.
And this is where that narrative control is coming in pretty damn thick. Dennis is portraying the left, as in simpliciter, the whole left, or at least the bulk of the left, being in favour of complete equity for everyone. So everyone gets the same amount of money. That just isn't true. It's a complete straw man. Yes, you'll find some people on the left that want that, just as you'll find some people on the right that don't want any taxation whatsoever. But just as it would be wrong to focus on that small community and present it as if it's the whole right, that is what Dennis is doing here on the left. But why is he doing this? What's going on here? Does Dennis really have this much of a poor grip on what his opposition believes? Because I don't think that that's true. Rather, what's going on here is the narrative control. Remember, he's talking to an audience and he's trying to convince them that maybe you're right-wing, not left-wing. And so what I'll do is I'll present the left in the most uncharitable and fringe way possible. But when it comes to the right, what I'll do is I'll select for the good parts that I know someone in the centre is going to favour, such as liberty, and not focus on all of the religious oppression that happens across the board. So it's very frustrating, but this is basically Daily Wire in a nutshell.
And for the right, it is liberty.
Liberty, you say, Dennis? I guess that's why Ben Shapiro and Dennis Prager and everyone else at the Daily Wire are very strongly campaigning for trans people to be able to get the drugs that they need, for gay people to be able to marry. You know, like those classic Catholic and religious values. They're just coming through here, aren't they, with liberty? Except, of course not. Because while Dennis is presenting himself as the adult in the room, he's actually just completely strawmanning the positions here.
While we're talking about liberty, let's talk about speech.
Alrighty, so we're on to free speech. Let's see, according to Dennis, where the left and right are when it comes to free speech.
While we're talking about liberty, let's talk about speech. With regard to free speech, the left-wing position is that speech should be free, but not for hate speech. Whereas the right-wing or conservative position is all speech except that which calls for violence should be free.
The big question that comes to mind here is, what exactly is violent speech? Okay, what is speech that calls for violence? Does it have to be explicit? Now, someone like Dennis is going to want to tell you that in order for something to be violent speech or a call towards violence, they're going to have to say, attack person X. So very explicit. Whereas more left-leaning people are going to tell you that you could say, person X is grooming person Y. And if it's not true, and if you say it in the right way, then you are calling for violence. Because rather than just saying attack person X, you're providing the person with reason to attack person X. And this is where a big conversation about what is hate speech, what is violent speech, what is a call to violence, this is where it all comes together, it crashes together, and we have an interesting conversation about what exactly, are the limits of free speech.
Even hate speech. Because what you call hate speech, the next guy may not call hate speech. When people say they're for free speech except for hate speech, what they are really saying is, I'm for free speech with what I agree with. That's not free speech. According to Pew Research, in the United States of America, almost 50% of young people say they believe in free speech but not for hate speech.
The problem with this statistic, of course, is that it isn't pertaining specifically to Democrats or to left-leaning people. Rather, it's just saying millennials are okay with limiting speech offensive to minorities. That said, I do think it's fair to make the inference that this is going to be predominantly left-leaning people, if only because most millennials are left-leaning. This is a serious problem that Dennis and the Daily Wire have, and this is why they're putting a lot of their time and attention into making cartoons to groom and condition children, they hope, to have their ideals rather than, left-leaning ones.
But of course that means they don't believe in free speech. When I was a kid, Nazis, real Nazis, not people that are just called Nazis because people don't like them, real swastika-bearing Nazis, people who adored Adolf Hitler, wanted to march in a Jewish neighborhood outside of Chicago called Skokie, Illinois. They chose Skokie because many Holocaust survivors lived there. It was a particularly sadistic thing. Most liberal groups at the time, the American Civil Liberties Union, even some Jewish groups, said Nazis have a right to march in the United States of America. That's real hate speech, and I agree with that.
Likewise to Dennis, I am absolutely for free speech, and so I want Nazis to be able to speak. Not just so that I know who they are and I have the ability to know what specific misinformation I need to debunk, but also because a principle isn't a principle until it costs you. And so I'm in complete agreement with Dennis here. And I also do think that he's right to emphasise that those who are most opposed to free speech in the West today are left-leaning people. I think it has more to do with the fact that the left are in power, but he is right that there's a lot of left-leaning people that are very much not okay with what they call hate speech. And the problem, as Dennis has pointed out, is that hate speech is a very vague thing that can be applied and will be applied in very unintuitive and very devastating ways. And so I think that Dennis is broadly correct in this one.
That's real hate speech, and I agree with that. That is the way it works. If you allow for free speech, you will allow for speech you don't like.
Alright, so next up we have human nature. Let's hear what differences there are, according to Dennis, between the left and the right.
Human nature. Even on that, there is a big left-right difference. On the left, generally speaking, starting with Rousseau and the French Enlightenment, the belief is that human nature is basically good.
So Jean-Jacques Rousseau, he's someone I studied in university, and I've studied him since because of, well, Enlightenment values, because of the French Revolution. He is someone who has a very complex view of human nature. He certainly doesn't think that humans are basically good. His view is that humans have an innate moral software, if you will. He didn't know about evolution by natural selection, but he believed that we had an innate moral software, and he believed that that software is very much corrupted by society. His view on society, on the big communities that we have, the cosmopolitan world that was building at the time, is that it was essentially detrimental to human nature. And so he wanted to essentially not have that. So a lot of what he was saying was, if you want humans to be their best and to be happy, you need to make sure that they're not in this industrialized state that we live in. So yes, Jean-Jacques Rousseau believed that humans are generally good, but he heavily caveated that this is only true in the state of nature. He believed that the industrial world that we live in massively corrupts humans. Also, the Enlightenment was characterized by a very broad diversity of philosophy, of politics, of moral ideals, you name it. It wasn't one-dimensional in this sense at all. Some believed that humans are fundamentally good, whereas others believed that we are fundamentally bad, whereas others still believed, well, a mixture of things. For instance, John Locke believed in a concept that's known as the blank slate. And so what this entails is that we are not born with any software. We are born with a blank slate, and that we are conditioned by the world around us. And so there is no innate element, rather we are entirely moldable and malleable to society. Whereas Thomas Hobbes, to give just one more example, he believed that humans are very much based in self-interest, and so in the state of nature we would be very warlike and very tribalistic. So what we're seeing here from Dennis is really very one-dimensional. It's a very one-dimensional view, and him dropping these names and these terms gives the impression that he knows what he's talking about, and maybe he does, but he's certainly not selling it here, at least not by my lights, as someone that actually does know about these people.
And on the right, we're not basically good. We're not basically rotten, but we're not basically good.
Which is ironic, of course, because much of the right believe that we are created in a good God's image. The more important point to be made here is to notice that Dennis has pinned the left, simpliciter, to quite a radical view, and that is that humans are basically good. Because not many people were going to believe that. All of our experiences in life tell us that being good, it takes hard work, very hard work. Whereas he's put on the right-hand side that you could think that humans are good, you could think that humans are bad. He's been very vague with his language, which of course means to you, the viewer, who, remember, he's inviting you to reconsider whether or not you're left-wing or right-wing. He is betting, and probably with good money, that you're going to favour the way that he's described the right over the left. And as a left-leaning person, I can tell you that I would feel that way if I wasn't equipped with the information that I have.
And why does this matter? If you think people are basically good, how do you explain people doing bad things?
Well, some might explain good people doing bad things due to socio-economic situations, due to not having opportunities, due to the environment carving and shaping them, at least to a degree, where they're going to be doing some bad things. Now, this isn't to excuse those individuals, but it is to explain why they might do what they do. And here's the thing, the statistics really back this up. There are plenty of studies showing that socio-economic situations have a very, very high correlation with good and bad people.
So on the left, almost always, outside forces will be blamed. So something must have corrupted this wonderful being called human in order for anything bad to actually occur.
The reason why I, who very much leans left, have this view is because the evidence is absolutely overwhelming. So, since we were mentioning foster care before, let's bring that up again. Something like 50% of those that go through foster care do not graduate high school. and only 3 to 10% of them earn a bachelor's degree. What's more, there's a correlation between foster care and having a criminal record. And it isn't because these people are bad. It's really obvious that environmental factors, opportunities, and lack of opportunities make a really big difference and indeed shape someone to a very big degree. And so if you, me, or anyone else want to solve this problem, particularly for the next generation, then guess what? You're going to have to cough up some money. You're going to have to redistribute wealth. You're going to have to make sure that the next generation inherits a world better than the one that we received. But under the rubric of Dennis, he's going to want us to suppose that these bad people are just bad people. It's not because they went through foster care. It's not because they've had a lack of opportunity. Rather, they are just bad people. The fact that they went through foster care, it didn't really, get them to do what they're doing. Well, I just think that that's a smooth brain interpretation of the world around us. You see, Dennis will say that people like me are excusing these individuals by pointing out these factors, but that's just not the case. That's not what we're doing. Rather, what we're doing is we're saying, look, we can blame the individual, and we can certainly hold the individual responsible, at least to a very large degree, and we should. That's very important. If only for getting them rehabilitated, it must be taken seriously. But if we want to solve this problem, it goes deeper than this. And if you're not going to look at very, very compelling statistics, and you're not going to work with those statistics, then you're just not going to fix the problem. The other thing to be said is that Dennis also blames other things. He is going to want to say that that person who stole, let's say, or did something, bad, he's going to want to say that you can explain this by reading scripture. You can read Genesis and understand the full, and then you'll understand why humans act this way. So he has a blaming factor involved. But whereas his is this situation where you can't fix it, and thus blaming the individual is all you've got, left-leaning people tend not to be religious, and thus what they do is they look at the socioeconomic situation and they say, actually, you can prevent future cases like this. You still need to punish the individual, of course you do, but if you want to prevent repetition, then it ain't good enough to just go, bad person, put them in jail.
So they blame racism, they blame poverty, they blame parents, they blame guns. There's always something other than the individual. Whereas on the right, people tend to blame the individual.
Again, if someone does something wrong, then sure, hold them as an individual responsible. Like, that makes sense. It's not like left-leaning people won't do this. They will. They absolutely will. But if you want to actually fix the issue, it isn't enough to just blame the individual. You have to look at why they are the way that they are, why they did what they did, and if the statistics show, as they do, that the way to fix this requires money, it requires that you have a state that can do something about it, then tough. Facts don't care about your feelings. If you want to solve this problem, and most of us do, you need a state that can do it.
You have what people on the right would say, a malfunctioning conscience.
But why do they have a malfunctioning conscience, Dennis? Is it because they are inherently bad? Is it that God carved you from gold, but them from feces? Or is it a combination of several factors, with one of the big ones being opportunity, environment, socio-economic situations?
You should have known that that is wrong, or you did know that was wrong, and you still did it. So that's another massive difference between left and right. Do you blame people for the bad that they do?
I know that Dennis isn't a Christian, but many of the viewers of his show, and indeed the Daily Wire, are Christians. And yet, one of the things that Christians say, one of the biggest teachings, is to hate the sin, not the sinner. And I've always felt that this wisdom is pretty damn good. You can find it across different religions, you can find it in ancient places, and, of course, you can find it in Christian theology. And it seems to me that what Dennis is saying is that Christians don't live up to this. They don't do it. They blame the individual. They blame people, not the sin. But if you're going to fix the sin, and you should, then you're going to have to acknowledge why that sin is happening in the first place. And if it turns out that the issue or the high correlates that we find are to do with equality, then you're going to want to try and go, you know what, we're made in God's image, we're all equal before God, maybe we want a society where it's a bit more equal than what it currently is.
The place of feelings or the heart in determining what is right.
Well, this is one of the big things that Dennis says. It's one of his catchphrases. He says that the left think with their heart, but the right think with their brain. So let's see if we're going to get more than less this in this segment.
The place of feelings or the heart in determining what is right. On the left, how you feel is much more important than it is on the right. Because, again, back to the human nature issue, if we're basically good, which people on the left tend to believe, then feelings or your heart is a great determinant of what is right.
Dennis is here predicating his position on the left when it comes to whether or not you should follow your heart, based on what he had to say about human nature. And if he's wrong about what he said about human nature, and he is, then this entire argument that he has here, this entire position, is going to entirely collapse. And if it's not immediately obvious that depicting a very large segment of society, in this case, as Dennis has specified, the left, as people who determine what is right, what you should do, based entirely on feelings, is a straw man, if it's not obvious straight up that that's going to be a straw man, then I'm not sure I can help you. You may have overdosed on red pills.
On the right, there's no trust of the heart.
Well, except for if you're a Christian, right? Because they say you should trust your heart. It's actually written in scripture. They rely on feelings, on intuitions over reason, rationality, consistency, etc.
Taken from what most people on the right, not all, I'll deal with that later, believe in the wisdom of the Bible. The Bible repeatedly warns against trusting the heart.
The Bible also tells us to take things on faith, which is explicitly emotional and intuitive. It's not based on logic, reason, and consistency. In fact, faith is often in despite of mounting evidence to the contrary. It could be said, if we are so inclined, that the left is actually working with statistics, with facts about the world. They're using their noggin, they're using their head, whereas it's the right that's using their emotions and refusing to recognize socioeconomic factors. But Dennis wouldn't be fond of this very simplistic take, this very uncharitable take, and yet that is precisely what he's doing here, all in the aid of convincing the viewer that they might be right-wing instead of left-wing.
And even if you're an atheist, you can appreciate that that's a pretty good warning.
Of course, I can appreciate that it's a good thing not to entirely rest on your heart, and the reason for this is because it's ubiquitous wisdom. It's found in the Bible, it's found in other religions, it's found in non-religious places. It's something that we've known for a long time. You need to get a balance of these things. Again, the big problem here is that Dennis is depicting the bulk of the left as not thinking through their positions, as not being rational, reasonable agents in the universe. Rather, they're entirely thinking on their emotions, and that's why they disagree with Dennis. And what this reveals, at least as far as I'm convinced, is that either Dennis is being incredibly uncharitable, which says a lot about the way that he approaches these things. It's not an earnest way to pursue truth or clarity, to put it bluntly. Or it reveals that Dennis knows nothing about his opposition, and that's probably worse.
Don't rely on your heart to come up with the right answer. It's a bad idea. You need a code, and you need reason applying to that code, and for most people, you need a code giver.
We've been through this ad nauseum, and so I'm going to keep it brief here, but having a code giver means that you're just following orders, and divine command theory is nothing more than that. It's not morality, it's about jumping the hoops that a divine dictator is telling you to jump. And again, because this is not the topic at hand, I'll ignore the fact that the Bible can, and indeed has, and indeed will continue to be used to justify completely contradictory positions.
But relying on the heart versus not relying on the heart is a huge difference. It is very unlikely in a conservative home
that you would see a plaque up, "Follow your heart."
Let's think for a moment of what a plaque stating "follow your heart" means, because the way that Dennis is speaking about it is if what it's conveying is that you should always follow your heart and never compromise. But what I would wager is that what's being conveyed here is that you should follow your heart but think with your head, which is to say that you should begin with your heart. Your heart should take you in the direction that you want to go. But as for how far you go, if indeed at all, well, you should use your noggin for this. I mean, if anyone was to read Dennis's scripture with such a one-dimensional view, he would have quite the issue, wouldn't he? Like, he would be very upset with someone doing this, and yet he has this incredibly one-dimensional view when it comes to a statement that he doesn't like.
If I see a plaque in a home that says "Follow your heart," it is usually people who tend to be left of center. Not always, because not everybody thinks through everything that they believe.
What's ironic here is that Dennis is accusing people of not thinking through what they believe, and yet he believes something very, very simplistic about this plaque, about this statement, about this motto, and he hasn't thought through that maybe it's not to be taken as an authoritative statement in all situations and in all places. It's him that's not thinking this through. And notice that he's not just writing off everyone who's on the left who disagrees with him on this. He's actually writing off everyone on the right who happens to like this statement for some of the reasons I may have just expressed. He's not just saying that they rationally disagree with him and can see some merit in this where he can't. No, he's saying that they haven't thought through their position. It's, if you don't have Dennis's view, then you haven't thought through your position. And it's just childish.
But follow your heart is a terrible moral idea.
And now we are on to the source of human rights, and you can bet your bottom dollar that this is going to be intriguing. However, we are probably about 40 minutes into this episode, give or take, and this is a good time to end this episode. Anyhow, as always, thank you kindly for the view, and an extra special thank you to everyone who supports the channel. We really cannot make this content without you. You make such a difference. In fact, it wouldn't exist without you, so thank you very, very much.